Okay. Good evening, councillors, and welcome here tonight, and welcome to members of the gallery who are actually next door, and I have gone out to welcome a member of the community who's come for our meeting tonight. Membership of this meeting is as listed in the agenda, noting that we have an apology from Councillor Lawrence, and that may actually be confirmed leave of absence once we deal with item 8.1. Councillors, are there any disclosures of conflict of interest tonight? Thank you. I will note that I did overlook the acknowledgement. So, Nyama, Wangeri Wairangulin, Gunganinu Bik Weno Darandari, Nyariana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Gagukal Nangit Bambuth Yellingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. First order of business today is confirmation of the minutes of the previous council meeting. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. The next order of business is question and submission time. We have one question that's been received. I'll read that question out because I don't believe that member of the public is here. The question is from Ms. Maria Paletti. According to the 2016 Australian census data, the number of families living in apartments increased by 56% between 2011 and 2016. Despite its growing popularity, there is evidence that apartment dwellings are not meeting the needs of Australian families. Unlike suburban families who could spend more time in their own homes, families living in apartments depend on local environments due to limited space within apartment complexes. DADA, the Darebin Appropriate Development Association, is very concerned that Council voted to seek through Amendment C186 state government permission to charge developers an open space levy of only 10%, just half the required to replace the loss of open space in Darebin. If the levy is only 10% at most, how does Council plan to make up the difference? And is Council planning to use rates, or are you planning to continue the legacy of overdevelopment in Darebin and the consequent lack of open space, condemning residents to severe lack of amenity so that developers... I wonder if I might have lost a couple of words because that doesn't seem to finish. But I will thank Ms. Paletti for the question, and here's the response. Although the overall projected need for open space in Darebin is 18.2%, it is intended that this need would be met in a number of different ways, not just through the open space levy. This would include things like getting government grants for new open space, negotiating with developers on strategic sites, new joint access agreements, and working with other landowners such as VicTrack and the Level Crossing Removal Project to create new public open space. A 10% levy in an established area like Darebin is unprecedented, and any higher levy is unlikely to be accepted by the state government. We're prepared to be bold in what we're asking for because we know that that's what's needed. Our projections suggest that a significant increase in the levy from 2.5 or 2 to 5% to 10% will be enough to maintain a good standard of open space as Darebin grows. Our officers are very happy to talk through the detail of how open space planning will work in the municipality as the population grows, and we'll be in touch to talk through it in more detail. Thank you again for that question. I don't believe there are any other questions tonight, nor have I been made aware of any submissions. Oh, we're just double checking with the audience member. Thank you. We've confirmed that there are no questions, so we will proceed to petitions. There are no petitions as far as I'm aware, so that will bring us to urgent business.
May I have one urgent business item that I would like us to consider? So I move a motion that it be admitted as part of our council agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I don't think councillors can consider whether or not it's urgent if they don't have it, so I'm not sure whether we have been presented with that in our paperwork. Yes, it is. So, councillors, can I draw your attention to, under urgent business, the item that Councillor Greco has presented? Noting also that there is an item under urgent business from Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco, you're seeking a motion that be admitted as urgent business?
Yes.
Is there a seconder for Councillor Greco's motion? That's been seconded by Councillor Williams. We'll now have a debate which relates only to the matter of whether it is urgent, not to any content of that business item. So, Councillor Greco, you have 3 minutes. Because we don't have the clock up on the screen, I will let you know when you've got 20 seconds to go.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Williams, for seconding my request for this urgent business item. Councillors, as we know, we've already provided some sort of relief package to our community, but in that relief package, there's no mention whatsoever of a rate relief. We've made some changes, some administrative changes in relation to the late payment of rates, etc., and waiving some fees and charges as they relate to local traders. But I believe that this motion is important that we consider it now, because the next meeting of council will be a meeting where we will be considering, I assume, from what I've been advised, is the draft council budget, and it's important that we receive a report of this nature as a matter of urgency, so that we have that information, and if need be, we can incorporate some of the options that the officers provide us in relation to our draft council budget. So that's why I'm seeking that this matter be heard as an urgent item of business, because it's essential in these very quick and fast-moving times that we get all the necessary information as quickly as possible at our fingertips, so that we're in an informed position to make important decisions like we will be doing at the next council meeting in regards to the council draft budget. So I urge councillors to consider this as an urgent business item, so we can get that report, and then from that report we're all in a better, more informed position to make decisions in relation to what further support and help we can provide our local traders in the community. So I urge councillors to consider this urgent motion, so at least we can have a debate about it, and then see where it goes from there.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams?
Thank you. We find that we're currently in a pandemic crisis, and things are changing on a day-by-day scenarios. If not, it's an hour-by-hour. In reference to Gaetano's urgent motion, I think it can't wait until our next council meeting, which is several weeks off, a month away, and I think it's we owe it to him that we add it to the agenda and we hear what he has to say regarding his urgent motion.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers as to whether the matter is urgent? Councillor O'Meara.
Just briefly, I'd like to speak against the motion, and the reason for that is at our special council meeting on Friday last week, we adopted our new financial hardship policy, which effectively means that no residential or business owner will be required to pay rates there's going to be no interest on rates until June next year. So effectively what that means is no one is committed to paying any rates of any kind if they are unable to in the next 15 months. Therefore, although this is an important issue that I know is being considered and debated and discussed across Victoria and beyond, it's not something that meets the requirements, I believe, to be admitted as urgent business to this meeting, as it could be safely considered at the next meeting and still very easily meet the requirements of the deadline for which rates must be paid, being June 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers on the issue of whether this is urgent business? Then I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Do I have a right of reply?
Can I just check? I'm not sure on this particular debate that there is a right of reply. Mr Mann, because we're only debating as to whether it's urgent. Do you?
Sorry, we're voting on the old London law and this isn't a procedural motion.
It's not a procedural motion, so.
Okay.
But before I have just very quickly, look, I appreciate the point that's been made about the how we consider the hardship policy. I stated in my early intervention that the hardship policy is not about rate relief. That is an administrative arrangement in order to defer the existing rate liability to a later date. What this motion refers to is in relation to looking at options in regards to rate relief, which could possibly mean reducing the rates for our traders and for our commercial businesses. So it's a completely different proposition which has been put forward here, and I think it's important for councillors to consider that. The other point that was made is that we can consider this at a later date. The next council meeting, councillors, we will be considering the draft council budget. And I, as a councillor, and also other councillors, don't have information about what the consequences would be of providing some rate relief in relation to adopting that, if we were to, as part of the council budget. I think it's will be irresponsible on our part to go towards a draft council budget without that information. And otherwise we would have to acquire that information in other means, which then would be subject to criticism of that it's a hodgepodge ideas that have been thrown forward. What I'm seeking here is that we get that information, which is critical information, so that when we get to the endorsement of the draft budget, we can make a serious, considered financial decision and weigh up the financial consequences and implications of having rate relief for our local traders in particular. So again, I urge councillors to
10 seconds.
Consider this, and let's have the debate on it rather than just refusing it at the outset, like the way it's been proposed by the opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now put that to the vote. So we're voting as to whether or not to accept this as urgent business. All those in favour? And against? That motion is lost. Councillor Williams, I've been informed that you would prefer for yours to be managed as a potential amendment rather than urgent business. Is that correct? Correct. Okay, thank you. There are no other items of urgent business, so that brings us to consideration of reports, starting with item 8.1, request for leave of absence. Councillor Tim Lawrence.
I move an amendment in relation to 8.1.
Certainly.
So I move an alternate motion, which reads in the first line that Councillor Lawrence has requested leave of absence from the 26th of March 2020 to the 24th of April 2020. That's the alternate motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor McCarthy, thank you. Councillor Greco.
Just very briefly, as we all would have seen, I think we all received an email later this afternoon of Councillor Lawrence's circumstances and his clarification in relation to his leave of absence request. And he specifically said that according to his documentation, that his leave of absence will be required up to the 24th of April. So it's just adhering to Councillor Lawrence's wishes, and I think it's only fair that we acknowledge that and respect that, and note that in the motion that we're considering here tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor McCarthy, yes. Councillor Williams, did you have a question?
Yep.
Yes.
Is there anywhere in the Act that we need a NOM or anything like that for that amendment or change?
No, you're in relation to Councillor Lawrence's leave of absence?
Yeah.
No, that's fine. So,
And my question also is, this is very unusual for it to come into council. Is there a background for why it's coming to council as opposed to normally it's the CEO's discretion that does this?
I'll ask the CEO to respond to that, but I actually think that our process in the past had been incorrect. So, Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question, Councillor Williams. There's a little bit to that. In the past, what has happened for a very long time, as far as I can establish, if a councillor was absent, they simply wrote a letter, it was recorded as an apology. That's the correct procedure. The Act provides for formal leave of absences if a councillor is going to be absent for 4 consecutive council meetings. So they're ordinary council meetings, not planning committee and not briefings, just ordinary council. So in fact, under the legislation, a leave of absence from council is not technically required in this instance, but because of the uncertainty around COVID-19 and all those kinds of things, Councillor Lawrence was of the view that his preference would be to seek a formal approval from council in this instance, which is entirely up to council to consider. My view is that that's appropriate.
Yes, Councillor Lasserve.
The report mentions the old Act. Does the provision remain the same in the new Act? Because I think the new Act has now come into force. Is that right?
Yes, it does. Through you, Mayor Rennie, the new Act does have similar provisions. Yeah, certainly.
Thank you. Councillor Greco, Mr Mann has just pointed out to me that Councillor Lawrence's request, as per his email today, actually related to the 26th of February, not the 26th of March. You have actually moved a motion stating the 26th of March. What I'm going to suggest, because the motion has been moved and seconded and you've spoken to it, is that I'll get Councillor McCarthy to speak as the seconder, and then yes, thank you, Councillor Lasserve. I'll go straight to Councillor Lasserve for an amendment, which I'm sure will be useful.
A simple error on my part.
Yeah,
if you want,
completely.
you could exercise your discretion to fix it.
So,
yeah.
Can we exercise discretion without an amendment? Or I think we've got a motion on the table that's been moved. So let's do it properly. I think it's not a problem. But Councillor McCarthy, 2 minutes.
I'll just withhold my seconding speaking rights just to keep us moving.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lasserve, you have an amendment? To amend from the 26th of March.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what Councillor Greco said, but 26th of February to the 24th of April, 2020.
Thank you. Is that acceptable to you as the mover, Councillor Greco?
Yes, that's what I had here down.
That's okay.
I may have said something else.
I think you might have said March. So I think we're all on track, but we've got it doing it formally. Yeah. And that's been accepted by the mover and the seconder?
It's fine. Could we just have the motion read, please, so that we're all clear on what we're voting on?
Mr Mann.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, that Councillor Tim Lawrence be granted a leave of absence from the 26th of February 2020 to the 30th of April 2020.
So no, we're now on the 24th of April, which is what Councillor Greco wished to move. Okay, so the dates, so we're clear, the 26th of February to the 24th of April 2020.
Spot on.
Okay, great.
Happy to accept that as the seconder.
Okay, so that's been moved and that's been accepted. That is now the motion. Are there any further speakers to the motion?
Only just as a seconder, I just would say I wish all the best to Councillor Lawrence and appreciate him bringing this request to us in this way.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Any further speakers? No, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll now move to item 8.2 on the agenda, proposed sale of discontinued road rear of 63 to 69 Southern A. Councillor Williams has moved that, thank you, seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor Williams.
This is pretty straightforward. It's just a discontinuance between 63 to 69 Southern Hayes Street and 58 and 64 King William Street of the discontinuance of the laneway behind. It will just go out to process where the officers will engage the owners of those properties and see who is interested in purchasing that parcel of land or their particular parcel of land.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So we know that we've got one owner interested in this piece of land and that the people on the other side are not interested. We've had a phone call from them. So this all looks, as Councillor Williams was saying, pretty straightforward. So happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Just a quick question. In relation to page number 13, is that just a copy of a particular gazetted item? Because it talks about a property on the Mornington Peninsula.
It's at the bottom of the page.
It's just a copy of the gazetted page.
Okay.
Starts at the bottom.
Mr. Mann, I'll get you to formally answer that question. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. On page 13 is a page from the Victorian Government Gazette. There's an ad from the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, and at the bottom of that starts the ad from the Darebin City Council about a road discontinuance.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Williams. That brings us to item 8.3, intention to declare a special charge solar savers batch. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Lasserve. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I would note in moving this that this is the first of our solar savers installation intention to declare motions in the current context of COVID-19, and the councillors would note that in the report there is some specific commentary around the safety implications of the program and the important work that council and its partners in this program are doing to ensure the safety of both residents, installers and everyone involved in a successful solar savers assessment process. In saying that, I'm really pleased to say that in this current batch we have 21 residential properties that have agreed to join the Solar Savers program. This will lead to the installation of 94.71 kilowatts across those residential properties, which is absolutely fantastic. It joins to the 1,500 residential properties that are already Solar Savers homes, and of course the various business properties that have joined us recently. With this current batch, we'll see a greenhouse gas saving of 139 tonnes of CO2, which is a terrific outcome. I'd like to congratulate those households for getting on board, seeing the benefits of this program as so many others have, and I look forward to seeing further solar savers installations in coming months and years as per our plan. And would just reiterate, as the report outlines very clearly, that we are well ahead in terms of our target to double solar in the city of Darebin, and of course great progress in particular with solar savers in the current term.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserve. Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you. That brings us to item 8.4, Bundoora Homestead Board of Management Future Governance Model. Councillor Newton moved. Councillor Greco seconded that.
I'm not seconded.
Pardon? You're not second. You're not okay. So that's been moved by Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder? Councillor Amir, thank you. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this is quite a big change for the Bundoora Homestead Board of Management. They've been a board for a number of years now, and I've been on the board with Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence for the last 3.5 years. They've come a really long way in that time. I do recall when they came and presented to us at council, which meant that as a result we chose to give them a little bit more funding, which Ella and the team have done an absolutely incredible job with. It's been really wonderful to see the way that the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre has developed with the guidance of this Board of Management. But we have had challenges, particularly in the last year, with meeting quorum, and there are quite a lot of restrictions as a Section 86 committee that we have to go through. So when we had discussions at the end of last year about whether we wanted to stay a Board of Management or change to an advisory committee, I'm really pleased that the discussion was really open and diplomatic, and the members that were there really understood that this was going to make things a lot easier, particularly with the new Local Government Act. I think what's good about the report that we've got in front of us is also that by calling it I think it's going to be the Art and Heritage Committee, what that means is it also really speaks to the scope and the broadening scope of that centre that is really for art and heritage across the city and not just physically in Bundoora. I'm really pleased by the work that the board has done, and I'm really pleased that I'm pretty sure that we can expect that quite a few of the current members will join the new board. I think there's a lot to be done, and I think having an Art and Heritage Advisory Panel is going to be particularly important as we go into the next phase where we are looking at new grants, new ways of being online, and I'm really looking forward to what this committee is able to do.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
Thanks, Mayor Rennie. The Bundoora Homestead Board has done wonderful work, and it's always a pleasure to hear from them in briefings and to see the breadth of art that we see at Bundoora Homestead. There's certainly nothing like it in terms of the history and the kind of art and that juxtaposition of the traditional formal garden with really cutting-edge work that's happening all the time. It was interesting to read this report and to speak to the officers about this, because originally I was concerned around loss of I suppose, power and authority given to this group of experts. But it is very clear from those discussions and from this report that there was a very transparent conversation, as Councillor Newton said, that this was the preferred option of the board going forward, and that it brings opportunities that were not possible under the previous arrangement, including around some of those administrative hurdles that were getting in the way of process, and the new breadth that's now possible with a broader remit than we've had previously. So I'm happy to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I have an amendment, and I'm sorry, I've got it just written out here on a piece of paper. It's a very small amendment. If I may read it out, that it will be an additional point 6 that reads as follows, that in consultation with advisory panel members, Council review the new advisory committee arrangements within 12 months of them taking effect.
Thank you. I'll just get you to read that again very slowly so that people have time possibly to write it and to consider it.
Thank you, Mayor. It'll be an additional point 6 that reads as follows. In consultation with advisory panel members, Council reviews the new advisory committee arrangements within 12 months of them taking effect.
Yes, thank you for that. That's obviously been moved by Councillor Greco. Before I ask for a seconder, there is a question. So, Councillor Amir?
I just want to confirm that that amendment refers exclusively to this newly created advisory committee and not beyond that.
Ms Wilkinson?
Through you, Mayor, assuming that was the intention, you could strengthen that perhaps by adding the words Art and Heritage Advisory Panel.
Councillor Greco, are you happy to take the advice of the CEO? Yes, so that would be clarified. Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for Councillor Greco's amendment? Yes, actually, very true. Councillor Newton, you...
Happy to accept.
That's been accepted, and as the seconder, Councillor Amir, accepted. Thank you, Councillor Greco. That amendment has been accepted by the mover and seconder, so that's now the motion.
Could I just say a few words?
Absolutely.
Without going over what the other councillors have said and acknowledging the good work that has been done by the existing board, I note also that there has been some division, if you like, in the board about whether to become an advisory committee or to remain as a board, and that question was addressed by the board, and the obvious pros and cons is that by being a board, it has greater independence, particularly financial independence in decision making, and also in terms of setting the policy direction of the Bandura homestead and the art activity that emanates from there. So why, therefore, I've included this motion is to give some sort of assurance, if you like, to the board members who will soon become committee members, advisory committee members, that if the new arrangement is not satisfactory or doesn't work to their best intentions, that there's an opportunity for the council to review that new advisory committee arrangement, with a view, if need be, depending on what the advisory committee members say, possibly even to revert back to a Section 84 type arrangement where they have greater independence. I think it's important that we give that assurance to the committee, because I think one of the important points that was made, and particularly made to me, is that the committee may lose a little bit of its status and a little bit of its influence in attracting high-level experts to be part of the, if you like, of the oversight of the Bandura homestead. So this particular amendment or inclusion gives that possibility for a future review.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Newton, for the motion. That brings us to item 8.5, Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre concept design. Moved by Councillor McCarthy. Seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. I love the enthusiasm. So, as councillors would see, the recommendation here is that we endorse the concept design that's put forward and obviously continue engagement with our stakeholders and community. We know that we are in a staged process with the redevelopment of the Northcote Aquatic Centre. It is a necessary, in fact, in some respects, quite urgent redevelopment because of the age of the facility and, of course, the condition. And, of course, this also provides us with an opportunity to, which we have done, and that's where the concept design really demonstrates that, to take a fresh look at what this site can be, what it can do, and how it can be a really contemporary response to what an aquatic centre is, obviously in the context of a climate emergency, in the context of maintaining and expanding wherever possible those health and wellness opportunities, and the ability for our community eventually, when we are able to return to the pools and to connect. I want to just highlight for councillors some of the things that I think are incredibly exciting about this project, and which will be part of the legacy of this project, not just here in Darebin, but I think for aquatic centres across the country, which is that this is an aquatic centre that is designed to achieve 6-star Green Star. It is also an aquatic centre that is designed wherever possible to be all electric, no gas. There is some commentary in the report about where there is the possibility under some scenarios for some gas to be required, but on the whole, the intention here is that this is an aquatic and recreation centre to be designed and developed in the context of the climate emergency. And that's a really important thing, because if we are to say that as a city we are moving to zero carbon, beyond zero carbon in the future, then we need to show how you can do that with a facility that traditionally would have been a high energy consumer and would have been highly reliant upon gas as the major source of energy for heating pools. So I'm really pleased with where we are at the moment with this project. There's been some in-depth consultation and involvement from the concept and design team and from other key stakeholders. And as councillors would see, Royal Lifesaving Victoria has also been involved. When you do something like this, you need to think about it from all the perspectives, not only obviously the sustainability perspective, but the safety perspective, the programming perspective, and of course the long-term community impact. And that's really what is at the core of this project. So I support, as is proposed. There's also further consultation that will now be undertaken with the community about the concept design. That'll be extensive consultation. It is obviously a challenging thing to consult around a project like this in the context of not being able to have people in groups face to face in the ways that we previously would have. And so councillors would see that there is commentary in the report about how we'll seek to do that. We do not want to limit
10
the scope,
seconds.
and ability to consult and involve the community in this decision. And that's why the proposed response is as is listed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
I'm very excited to be considering this project tonight after many years of hard work. This is one of the biggest projects that our council has been working on, and it's really exciting to be thinking about this new facility that will be hopefully serving Darebin residents for the decades to come. Through the community consultation so far, we've heard from residents that they value their local pool as a local pool. We're looking at a model that's not going to be super fancy looking multiple water slide style. It will be designed for Darebin residents, meeting their needs for people across the entire age spectrum for all uses. As Councillor McCarthy mentioned, there's a few exciting components, particularly the sustainability of the facility with a 6-star rated facility and the use of electricity only once it's up and running, which is unprecedented. I personally love the guiding principles, especially around inclusion, flexibility, and the ability to meet future needs, not just current needs, because of course Darebin's going to be looking pretty different in 50 years' time. Oh, I don't know how much time I've got. That's a bit funny.
Another 40 seconds.
40 seconds, great. Originally, when we were looking at plans, we were hoping it might be possible to be able to build a new facility on site while keeping the original one open. It's now looking like that's not going to be possible because that design would have really big impacts on what would be able to build. So while I understand that will be frustrating for local residents, I'm excited that we'll be able to purpose build something based on what people want, including what I've mentioned, as well as the better integration to the other facilities, to the local park. People ask for lots of shade. We're going to get it. We're going to get indoor, outdoor splash areas, nature-based play, and I can't wait to go there.
Thank you.
Once people have a look.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
I just have a question, if I may. I should have asked this at the outset. I suppose the question that I'm asking is that, given that there will be more stakeholder engagement and consultation with the community, will we get a report of that engagement and consultation in the form of a council report before we actually continue to proceed with the project into the construction stage?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. I'll refer that to Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. What our typical approach has been is to go through the consultation stage. We have briefed the councillors previously on other major projects after the consultation stage, and that was our intent here, was to come back through a briefing session, let you know what the community thought of the concept, and then make any necessary changes at that time.
So, just understand, that is the intent?
Yes. Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Yes, Councillor Messina.
Mayor Rennie, during the briefing that we had a few months ago, or perhaps a month, I'm
Sorry,
not too
can
sure.
I just clarify, is this a question or
A question.
Okay, thank
It's a
you.
question.
Yep.
I'd like to point to page number 67. It says some of the sustainable initiatives considered in the project are, and I note that there is no mention of a circular waste economy nor of using recycled material in the content of the internal amenity. Are they some of the initiatives, because they were discussed during the briefing?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Messina. Once again, I'll refer that to Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, the zero waste facility is our plan. So that's already been discussed with the design team, so that's our plan. Recycle materials wherever possible, we'll do that. There was a number of other topics that councillors raised in the briefing, a prayer room, breastfeeding room. They're all being considered by the design team now.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Or you'd like to speak? Okay, thank you. Let's resume the debate. Councillor Williams.
It's great that council actually has projects such as this in the pipeworks for the Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre and concept design. We had community consultation was taken back in 2017, 2018, and delaying this next stage will have a huge impact on the project's timelines and also will have budget implications. Once a concept plan has actually been designed and council endorses it, it will actually be available for public viewing on the project website. Now, it's really important to know that we are going to be meeting the aspirational 6-star, Green Star as built rating for this particular site, because I think that's great in itself.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Mayor, I have just a slight amendment, just another additional point, if I may. Again, I'll have to read it out, and this just goes on the back of what we've just heard from one of our general managers, that council receives a council report in late June on the outcome of the consultations and engagement with key stakeholders and community members. I'd like to read that out again.
Yes, nice and
Okay.
slowly, that would be good, thank
So
you.
it'll be point 2, the council receives a council report in late June on the outcome of consultations and engagement with key stakeholders and community members.
Thank you for that, Councillor Greco. Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Amir, I'll ask if you have any. Sure. So we'll take your question first. Yep. Councillor Amir.
My question relates to the timeline of late June about what would happen in the event where the consultation activities had to be amended, like particularly due to the COVID-19 situation.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Amir. Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yeah, we've contemplated that. We're trying to be flexible and agile with our consultation. We think we've got quite a broad reach in our new consultation plan. Should we find that we weren't quite getting the contact and buy-in that we thought, we were going to extend it. So the timeframe might put us into a slight bother. That assumes we don't get the contact that we'd hoped.
Mayor, just as a question, if I may, I'm happy to take some advice from our officers in relation to the date, if June is too early of a date. I was just going by the timelines in the report. It could be a later date if I could get some advice from the officers in regards to that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco, for that flexibility. Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, if there was simply no date, we'd happily come back with a report when the consultation was done.
So the amendment would then read that council receive a report on the outcome of the community engagement process. Yep. Councillor McCarthy, did you have any questions in relation to that?
No, the questions have satisfied my point. I'm happy to accept it.
That's been accepted by the mover, accepted by the seconder. Thank you, Councillor Greco. That's now become the motion in front of us. Are there any further speakers? No? Then I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 8.6 on the agenda. Yes, Councillor Greco.
May I have an alternate motion that I'd like to move?
Thank you, and I believe that's been circulated, so people should have that in front of them. So, councillors, that is about halfway through these slides that you have. So I'll just give everyone a few seconds to make sure they've got the right page. So Councillor Greco has moved the alternate motion as per the page with his initials in the bottom right. Is there a seconder for that motion? That's been seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, I'm moving this alternate motion because after reading the report, which is a really interesting report, and I'm glad that it's come back to us, and I'm glad of the extensive monitoring and analysis that has been done. And therefore, moving this alternate motion is to, one is to better acknowledge the work that has been done as a result of this report, and also to ensure that we take into serious consideration the recommendations that have been made in the report, and therefore that we actually endorse the recommendations of the Edwards Lake Water Quality Monitoring final report. Also, I think it's important, and as I stated in this motion, that the report talks to the poor quality, or the poor water quality of the water at the lake, and if councillors in the report, there's a particular table in the report that actually shows that many of the facets of the lake and the water quality of the lake are either poor or very poor, and it's something that we actually need to address. And also the report talks about requiring further information in relation to the water quality of the lake, particularly including a catchment sanitary survey, because as is pointed out in the report, there is the potential that sewage is actually going into the lake, along with other sources of contaminated water that need to be monitored and need to be looked at, analysed and addressed. And also what this motion also does is that it calls on council funding a specialist feasibility analysis and options assessment report that considers the recommendations in the report that we've just received that talked about the water quality, and then looks at, because I think this is the next trunk of work that we need to do. Now that we know that the water quality of the lake is poor or very poor, do we sit on our hands and not do anything, or do we actually look at ways and scope out what work may need to be done and who needs to do that work in relation to addressing the water quality of the lake? And the report also points out that we're not just addressing the water quality of the lake from a recreational use or an amenity use, but also in terms of the ecosystem of the lake. And right throughout the report, there's constant mention of that. So, councillors, I'm hoping that you will support this motion, because we need that extra bit of work, so that then when we actually go to other parties and other stakeholders and negotiate with them and advocate on behalf of the lake, we're actually much more informed with better information about what may need to happen in order to improve the quality of the water of the lake.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
I'd like to thank the officers for such a wonderful report that's very detailed. What I did find quite a little concerning also, not only was the sources of the pollution influencing the water quality within the Edwards Lakes, that it's actually quite detrimental to the future ecosystem and recreational values of the lake. The high concentration of nutrients and heavy metals of E. chylo, microalgae and huge blue algae were apparent, and at different times within a month was quite differential between the month time. There was quite elevated pH and dissolved oxygen. What I found was the most disturbing was that there was inflows from the lake that consisted of roads, roofs, gardens, leaf litter, pet faeces and construction sites, as well as sewerage from poor infrastructure located within the catchment. Now, I think that if we can work on some parts of the lake, I think we would get some huge improvements just in one section alone there in the catchment that's coming straight into the lake. If we've got blocked or, cracked drainage that's going straight to Edwards Lake, I think that there will be some improvements. But looking at the report, as I said, it was very detailed, and there were some things that were quite horrifying, and there were some things that weren't so bad. So maybe we can make small changes, and that might make some huge improvements to the lake.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
Been thinking about this, and I'm going to speak against the motion in this instance. I absolutely agree that we could get great value from Edwards Lake if it was able to be used for recreational purposes again, for swimming and boating, and that would be very exciting to see, not to mention the biodiversity and ecosystem value that have been mentioned by Councillor Greco and Councillor Williams. I'm looking at this through the current context of where we're in. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We're focusing on rolling out our $10 million recovery package. We're not, we can barely even starting to count the huge loss of revenue from loss of deferred rates, from the stock market plunge. There is so much to come. And for me, what I feel like what the community needs most right now is a focus on the basics, as we have been doing, providing food packages and housing, social contact, as well as fast-tracking some of the existing work programs to deliver as much as we can from our existing commitments, and capital works like the NARC project we've just discussed. I also read the report. I also found it very interesting. It was a very popular report, clearly, with councillors. And one thing that struck me, I absolutely agree with what Councillor Williams said, that there's so many ways that this water is degraded with the heavy metals, with the E. coli, with the sewage. So for me, what I see there is that this is not something that will be easily fixed. To resolve this problem, to get to the point where we want, could be a huge, huge investment financially. We could do all of that and it still might not be enough because of all the on-stream impacts. The challenges are coming from everywhere, residential business, upstream, wherever. Where it comes to new projects, to use a cliche, I think we should focus on low-hanging fruit, and this apple is way too high up on that tree.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Can I please ask the officers, perhaps through you, Mayor Rennie, to allocate an amount based on the recommendations, based on the notice of motion, alternate motion from Councillor Greco, please?
Thank you for
What budgetary value are we looking at?
Thank you, Councillor Messina, for that question. Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I think it's page 46. We've estimated the costs for the specialist feasibility analysis and options assessment at $280,000. And that is sort of the assessment of what you could do and whether or not it would achieve the outcome you're after. The actual works, from looking at similar projects, if you sort of go past that stage, we'd expect to be multi-millions of dollars.
Thank you, Ms Olivier, for that answer. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
This is a really hard one. And initially I was going to support this, but I think after listening to the facts that we're looking at rate relief and what have you, it is something that must be done. Edwards Park Lake is one of the greatest assets that we have in the municipality. But unfortunately, with COVID-19, we need to put this on the back burner. Sadly, I don't want to say that, but unfortunately, that's what we've got handcuffs, and it's not to say that it's not required, it's not to say that it's needed. I just don't think it's something that we need to do in this current financial economic climate.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I also read this report with interest and been on this journey with Councillor Greco now for over a decade in terms of how we, I suppose, see the repositioning of Edwards Lake in a way not just as the body of water that you can walk around, cycle around, recreate around, but in fact a body of water that you could recreate on. And that's always been the vision that's been put forward. I think it's really interesting when you look through this report though, and it outlines the level of work that actually needs to happen, not just locally, but in fact well beyond the remit of Darebin Council. The agencies that are listed in the report, as councillors would see, include the likes of Melbourne Water, EPA Victoria, Yarra Valley Water, and of course Whittlesea City Council. Not just in terms of their own regulatory and decision-making roles, but also the range of organisations that they have influence over. And that's really where this comes down to, is that we have inherited a situation which is largely the result of other entities and either their inability to enforce action, in this case pollution, or in some cases the runoff from building sites, industrial sites, these sorts of things. So whilst I applaud the persistence in trying to look at how we could bring some sort of water-based recreation to Edwards Lake, the reality is that there is a human health risk to getting that water inside you right now. That's why water-based recreation is not possible there at the moment. The only pathway to doing that is to spend millions of dollars, not just to rehabilitate the existing water, but to manage all of the water entry points further up the line. And as is clearly outlined here in this report, that requires a whole lot of agencies to get on board and to commit to that. Not just those agencies, of course, but also the private sector organisations as well and the businesses. So I think this is something that will have to sit and will have to stay with us as a project to pursue at some stage in the future. There are very clear actions in the officer's recommendation, and I hope that that councillors will support those actions, but unfortunately I can't support Councillor Greco's alternative at the moment, so I'll be supporting the substantive if this motion doesn't succeed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? No. Councillor Greco, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, just very quickly, I think that we do need an addressing some of the concerns that have been raised by councillors. I think that we do need a further report in order to better articulate our advocacy. We talk about advocacy in this report so that we are better informed, so that we know through a report about what the responsibilities of other stakeholders will be. At the moment, we don't know that. We're supposing lots of things, but by actually being informed by a report will actually enable us to make more effective representations on behalf of council and in regards to other stakeholders. We need to actually scope the work that needs to be done. It doesn't mean that we have to do that work, but let's get an understanding and scope that work, and then again see who does what parts of that work. The essential point is, councillors, we just can't leave the lake as it is. If we don't take that further step, as it's been recommended to us by an independent report through its recommendations, particularly looking at a catchment sanitary survey, if we're not even doing that, we're actually not even acknowledging the report that is before us that has highlighted that the lake water is contaminated. If you look at page 107 of the council report, where it points out in relation to all the various factors, the pH level, particularly the nutrients level, heavy metals, it's very poor condition of the lake. And what the recommendations that we originally had, basically, I would argue, is that, you know, we're just sitting on our hands in relation to the lake. And it just astounds me, councillors, given that we're a council that prides itself on environmental values, that we're ignoring the lake. I mean, we talked about biodiversity, and we've done a lot of work in other spaces, but in relation to the lake, we just sort of say, well, just let it be, when it's one of the jewels of the city of Darebin.
Thank you. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. Councillors, Councillor McCarthy, you'd flagged an alternate motion.
Just to support the officer's substantive motion as listed in the report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCarthy has moved a recommendation that's seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for a really good, robust debate on this issue. I would just draw to councillors' attention of not only the substantive items included in the recommendation, but also the particular implementation strategy that is listed in the report. There is a lot of work that is taking place in relation to this. There is a lot of work, not just by council, but also in relation to the other regulatory organisations. And I just would draw to councillors' attention the fact that when it comes to Edwards Lake, and this is probably the only point I want to make on this, because I know that we have debated this already, when it comes to Edwards Lake, the sources of pollution are so broad, so diverse, and so far-reaching. I work in my day job in the place which actually sends a lot of the pollution down this way to both Darebin and Mary Creeks. And I can tell you now that the conversation we are having here is the same conversation that our colleagues in Mitchell Shire and our colleagues in Whittlesea Shire are having around runoff and industrial pollution and the impact on waterways, to the point where they do not have the regulatory powers to enforce the protection of their local environment and their natural waterways, which in fact actually means that they can't even realise the sort of outdoor recreation that we enjoy already at Edwards Lake. And I say that because if we are ever to see the sort of change at Edwards Lake, and I think Edwards Lake is a bit of a canary almost in the, not in the coal mine, but in the waterway, because it is a way for us, those of us that have privilege, to live in a place like Darebin that has well-designed, well-articulated outdoor recreation spaces. We need to be partnering with those councils to our north and actually talking about the sort of reform that's required to environmental regulation and what that would mean if it was to occur, to support the protection of that waterway and that passage of water all the way up the corridor there to those neighbouring shires. If we don't do that, and if that's not part of our future strategy of advocacy, then we're actually doing disservice to our neighbours to the north, because that's actually, they really need our help on that front. So I suspect that this is not the last time we'll talk about this issue, but our pathway to seeing Edwards Lake revitalised in some form, as the vision outlined by Councillor Greco earlier, requires much broader work, further work up north, and of course a much bigger action by the state government, and that's what the recommendation takes us towards.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I overall really support Councillor Greco's vision to see this lake return to what it once was, but that's going to take millions of dollars, and it's going to take much more than just Darebin Council. So, for example, we know from the report that it'll be $280,000 for that specialised feasibility study, and also that the report says that if we were to isolate Edwards Lake from the upstream industrial catchments, that would require state government intervention. It's not something that Darebin can do itself. I really agree with Councillor Messina from the last discussion that this is something where it's very, very important, but we can't do it alone. So with that, I agree with everyone else that it's a really good report, and that the water quality is clearly pretty bad at the moment. But I think this is something that's going to take more than just Darebin, and I think it's something that, as Councillor Amir said, it's not at all low-hanging fruit. So I really agree with most of what's been said. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Amir.
Not going to repeat what I've said already in the earlier debate. I guess, as I said, and I can see on Councillor Messina's face, that this is a real challenge, because it is something that is very important to us as councillors and so many residents, not only those who live right next to the lake, but also people who travel there, people with kids. It comes up a lot, even for residents in my ward. For us here in Darebin, everything that we do is, of course, interconnected with our surrounding councils. But when we're talking about waterways, it's just a whole new level of interconnectivity. And to a certain extent, what I'm thinking about reading this and hearing the debate is that what we should be looking at is not a focus specifically on Edwards Lake, but how the entirety of Mary Creek is managed. And I'm one of the directors on the Mary Creek Management Committee, so this is their bread and butter. But they're a small group with a small amount of funding, and I think what we should be advocating for is something that considers the creek in its entirety, because, as Councillor McCarthy mentioned, we cannot get the water quality that we want without considering what's happening further north. And what we know will be happening further north is more and more development. We're going to see higher and higher residential density all along the creek up to Wallen. staggering the rate of growth currently and into the future, as well as new industrial uses. And I know in City of Hume, there was talk of a new industrial smelter, I believe it was, right on the creek. So we have some current problems here. We've got future problems to come. And I think this is going to take much more than Darebin working on its own. It's going to take a cross-level of government, cross-council, bringing in MCMC, looking at the creek as a whole so that everyone can enjoy the level of water quality that we'd hope for across the whole creek.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I have an amendment that I'd like to move, and that the amendment read as follows. An additional point, that council conduct a catchment sanitary survey as recommended in the GHD report.
Could you read that again, please, Councillor Greco, so that the officers can write it so nice and slowly?
I'll repeat it, that council conduct, I'll start again, it's an additional dot point, that conduct a catchment sanitary survey as recommended in the GHD report.
Thank you for reading that a second time. Are there any questions in relation to the amendment that Councillor Greco has proposed? Councillor Newton?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Could we get an indication of cost?
Sure. Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. I don't have a breakdown with me at that level of detail. I am assuming it will require physical monitoring, and so just as an indication, the monitoring work we've recently done has been in the order of $65,000.
Thank you, Ms Olivier. Are there any further questions? No. Councillor McCarthy, you're the mover and Councillor Newton is the seconder. Do you accept the amendment?
No.
No. Thank you, Councillor Greco. The mover and seconder haven't accepted your amendment. Is there a seconder for Councillor Greco's amendment? No, that's lapsed for want of a seconder, so we'll keep going with the debate. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
It saddens me that we can't do this. But what I'm proud about this particular council is that this council inherited prior council's budgetary funding for master plan formulations and feasibility studies for projects that they couldn't complete, for maintenance that they didn't uphold on particular buildings. But that's not what this council is about. And I'm very proud to say, it saddens me that we can't do this. But logically, we cannot do it based on how much funds are available in our budget. And this council is not one of those councils that say, well, let's put a Band-Aid solution, let's tell the community we're going to do that. But where's the money going to come from? We are in the middle of an economic downturn where people cannot afford to pay their rates. We're asking for rate relief, we're out for traders, we're asking for this, for asking for that. Then we want to come up with another $248,000. We simply cannot. That is the reality. I wish it wasn't the reality. I want to see Edwards Park Lake and the lake flourish. We owe that to the community. It is one of our greatest assets, but we don't have a pool of funding to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? No? Councillor Greco?
Mayor, I'm going to be speaking against this motion. And the reason I'm going to be speaking against this motion, Mayor, is that I haven't heard anything from any councillor that really fundamentally convinces me of why we should not be doing this work. The motion that we have here before us is basically, to be very blunt, it's a do-nothing motion. It maintains the status quo. It doesn't really tell us or set a course on how we can either improve the lake into the future or how we can effectively engage and advocate with other stakeholders in regards to. I acknowledge that it's not only a Darebin issue, it's upstream issues, there's all sorts of issues, but the lake is within our boundaries. We have the prime responsibility of moving others in relation to the concern about the lake. To do that, we need concrete information. We need information from experts that enable us then to better articulate an advocacy strategy in relation to other stakeholders, the northern councils, the state government and other parties. Without that information, it's just hot air. What we're talking about is just hot air. Words that then are spoken at meetings, but then don't actually land anywhere without factual information. We've done this in the past with other projects and we've been successful, where the rail crossing in Preston, where we put money in our pockets, developed a report, and where we achieved what we did. And I think we could do that this year. And I think it's incumbent on us to do something here. And I acknowledge that our budget situation this year is tight. But at the same time, we don't have any borrowings. There's more ways to skin a cat in relation to the budget.
10 seconds.
We could actually borrow money in order to do other more capital works or to affront this $260,000 that's
Thank
needed
you,
here.
that's time.
So the budget issue does not convince me, and it's just an excuse not to proceed with critical, fundamental
time.
work
Thank
that
you,
needs to be
Councillor
done in
Greco.
relation to this lake.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy, you have a right of reply.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll keep this brief. I find some of the arguments put forward just then by Councillor Greco troubling because I think they don't reflect the quality and tenor of this debate, and frankly, I find it difficult to respond to comments about other councillors' intentions, which I think are unhelpful and also, frankly, incorrect. I won't say anything further about that, but I think we need to lift the tenor of the debate in regard to speaking about each other and the arguments we've made. I just would draw to councillors' attention in rebuttal to the points that were made, however, that the state government and in the minister in particular has been very clear about the pathway forward on this. The pathway forward is not unilateral action by council to invest in the order of close to $300,000, as is outlined in the report, or even in the case of what we heard before, around $65,000, when there is not the commitment of other agencies and not that regional approach. So I don't think our community wants us to be spending tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on something when there is not the commitment at other levels of government at the moment. I believe they would actually find that to be actually disingenuous, and I think they would find that to be ineffective and irresponsible, when the reality is we have an implementation plan here that's very clear. We have work that is underway. I find it actually a little bit offensive to talk about the fact that nothing's happening, because I find that offensive to both the good people at Merri Creek Management Committee, the council officers that work with them, and of course the good people at other agencies who I know are working really hard to try to get outcomes in this space. But whilst we may have a conversation here about Edwards Lake and what we would like to see at Edwards Lake, we do not live
10 seconds.
in an island. We are part of a water management and catchment management system, and our responses need to be collaborative and universal, not unilateral.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the end of consideration of reports. We're now at item 9, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. At 9.1, we have tackling wood smoke pollution. Councillor McCarthy.
Mayor, I've circulated an amended motion for councillors to consider. I would also just add a point, a line that's missing from that, and councillors would see that that has been circulated as an attached email. That is the amended motion. I'd just like to propose in moving this that in point 1, after the words about alternative heating, that the words should be added. The following words should be added. This should include targeting of residents who currently use wood heaters.
Councillor McCarthy, can you say that again nice and slowly?
So thank you. So under point 1 of this is the amended motion that councillors have, would just simply be add those words. This should include targeting of residents who currently use wood heaters.
Thank you.
And that's, so councillors have that amendment circulated, which hasn't been incorporated into this.
Can I hear that again, please? It's just not clear.
Certainly.
So the amended motion, which I'm moving, is the one that's circulated, which councillors
So,
have a copy
Councillor
of.
Greco, can you just check on your table that you have an email that was sent at 5:21 with Stephen Mahn's name on the top left-hand corner? No, Councillor Messina, we're not on that one though, we're on this. No, this. A single page. Includes an email from Councillor McCarthy at 5:21 with the amendment, which Councillor McCarthy is proposing to incorporate some words that were suggested by Councillor Amir into point 1. Councillor Amir, if you've got that, can you just pass it to Councillor? I'm not sure Councillor Greco's found the right one. Have you got the Here, Councillor Greco will get you one. Oh, Mr. Mahn's got one. We just want to make sure that every councillor. So just to be clear, Councillor McCarthy has proposed putting the motion that is included in this one-page email with the addition of words at point 1, which would say this should include targeting of residents who currently use wood heaters. Thank you for moving that motion, Councillor McCarthy. Is there a seconder for that motion? That's seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your patience, everyone. It's difficult to talk to this without it being on screen because I'm conscious that some people have a great interest in this particular matter and may be watching it online, and I'm sure they'll be able to catch up with the details through the minutes in subsequent days. However, just to be clear, the amended motion that I'm putting forward, which extends upon the good work that our officers have done and the good work that 71 petitioners and others in our community have called for, which is greater action by both council, by state government and in fact by us as the community to do whatever we can to reduce the risk of wood smoke pollution in our community, which can worsen the health impacts of residents with respiratory illnesses and respiratory issues, ranging anywhere from obviously asthma. I'm an asthmatic myself, so I probably should have an interest there, all the way through to people with various immunocompromised situations. Wood smoke pollution is a broad term which encompasses the smoke from home-based wood heaters, which were at one stage in Darebin's history basically the common form of heating for most households. We've transitioned over the years. That's not the case for most households, although some do maintain wood smoke heaters, both for heating and also for, I suppose, more of an amenity effect as well. And we know that for some households, this is the only source of heating that they have. And so what I've sought to do with an alternative motion is to ask and to call on the state government as part of our advocacy to look to how to restrict the use of wood smoke heaters in urban and built-up areas because of the risks that they do pose to neighbouring residents, but in turn, in doing so, to apply a social equity lens to that and to immediately bring about a mechanism through which anyone who is reliant upon a wood smoke heater for their
10
heating
seconds.
to in fact be able to include to get access to an electric heater either through a subsidised or other program. That's the program that put forward and I hope that councillors support it. This is a serious issue for many in our community. With COVID-19, it's made all worse, and with so many of us at home during the day, the risk of more burning during the day actually is going to exacerbate the risks for those community members. And I'd just like to thank Liz Poole, the lead petitioner, who I have approval to mention her name as the lead petitioner, bringing this to our attention again.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, and I apologised I called 10 seconds too early, so that's why I let you keep going. I hope I didn't cut you off. Councillor Amir.
Thanks, Mayor Rennie. I'm aware that this has been an ongoing issue for some residents for quite some time, in some cases 10 years or more, that they've been having negative impacts from wood smoke heaters from neighbours and trying to get change. And so I'm glad that we're able to I'm able to support this strengthened motion. It is a challenging situation given that it mostly falls outside our jurisdiction, so the extent of our power is limited. That said, there is work we can do, and that was my suggestion, to be explicit around targeting people who do have wood heaters who might not understand the impacts for other residents. Which can include, as was mentioned, the respiratory issues, especially for people with asthma, and particular concern with COVID-19 at the moment. It's also not a very environmentally friendly option, quite a lot of carbon going right into the atmosphere directly. And I do understand how it can be nice to have an open wood fire, and I'm definitely someone who likes sitting around the campfire, toasting marshmallows, etc. But it is something that's not, it is no longer appropriate for an urban environment like we now have in Darebin. And a lot of people living in houses that were built at a time when we didn't have the density that we have now, we didn't have the understanding that we have now about some of the effects. And so I hope that with greater understanding, together with some of the practical possibilities about, for example, supporting funding or providing options for what replacements could be possible, that we'll be able to reduce these impacts over time.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Greco.
Mayor, I just have a couple of questions just for clarification. Just in relation to point B of point 2B, where it talks about including restricting the use of wood smoke heaters in urban and built-up areas. Can council do that or not?
That's should be read in the context of 2, which is calls on the state government to take stronger action. So it's an advocacy ask of the state government. Is that correct, Councillor McCarthy?
That's correct.
Councillor Greco, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Just in relation to the bulk buying and the incentive scheme, again, is that a state government or a council requirement?
So it's part of point 2, which is calls on the state government too. So A, B and C in that section all refer back to point 2, calls on the state government.
Do we know what the cost of something like that would be?
I'll refer that.
From our officers about what sort of costs would involve, particularly in relation to our residents here in the city of Darebin.
Thank you. Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, if the state government were to act on an advocacy ask like that, the sorts of tools they might use might be incentives, similar to some of the incentives that currently exist, say for energy efficiency, where they put an obligation on power companies to fund some energy efficient work. So there'd be a few different mechanisms the state government could use from a policy perspective. Some of those may or may not have a cost to government itself. Sometimes they can create rules that put the cost onto market players. If they were looking at a bulk buy scheme specifically, they would be looking at staff to do a tender. So it would be the cost of running the tender. Presumably that would be a cost that would be a program across the state. It's probably all I can offer at this point.
Thank you, Ms Olivier. Councillor Greco, do you have further questions?
Yeah, and just one further question. Just in light of the email that we received this afternoon by our officers, in regards to the last point there, point 4B, how can local government strengthen to make it an offence for wood smoke to enter a neighbouring property? I just want to understand whether we have any powers in relation to that, and whether actually a report is actually necessary on that.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. Ms Olivier, can I refer that to you?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Certainly, in terms of the local law, it's subservient to state government regulation, and these issues are generally regulated through the Environment Protection Act and the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. So whatever we were to put forward through the local law would need to be consistent with those state government regulations. In terms of that specific mechanism, it's not something we have specifically turned our minds to, and we would do that if council were to adopt this resolution. What I would do in practice is, councillors would know we're currently reviewing the local law, so what I would do in practice is actually answer that question as part of the next report that comes to council on the local law, so it wouldn't create the work of a whole separate report on that specific issue.
Thank you for that response, Ms Olivier. Councillor Greco, do you have any further questions? No. Thank you. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. I would like at this point to just acknowledge the submissions that were received from community members, and I'd particularly take the time to do that in light of the fact that I believe they would have come tonight were it not for our strong recommendation that people watch from home. So I thank them for their time in making submissions to us. That brings us to the end of 9 on the agenda, so we're now at item 10, notices of motion. We have one notice of motion that's been submitted, and that's 10.1 in relation to COVID-19. Councillor Messina.
Mayor Rennie, I wrote this notice of motion almost a month ago and acknowledged...
Sorry, Councillor Messina, we might take a step back because I want to be clear that we know what motion we're considering. So are you seeking leave of the meeting?
Yes, I am. So that's what I was going to state. I was going to state that I seek leave to amend my notice of motion. I've circulated that amendment.
Okay. Does everybody have the circulated amendment, which has been presented to us? So it's the second one, if you're in these documents, so it's the second last page then, or the third last page. So not the initial one that says notice of motion 10.1, but the one that says alternate motion Lena Messina, which has 3 points, point 1, 2 and 3, just so we're clear. So Councillor Messina is seeking leave to move this motion. I'll just get everyone's attention and ask councillors, by show of hands, is leave granted? All those in favour of leave? Thank you. So Councillor Messina, leave has been granted for you to table the updated motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll then... Yes, that's been seconded by Councillor Newton.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie, we're living in a VUCA world, a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexities and ambiguity. I have 3 minutes to talk about this notice of motion. 3 minutes isn't really enough. In that 3 minutes, tragically, a person in Italy will lose their life due to COVID-19. Whilst we focus on pandemic and medical effects, we need to wear a multi-layered lens and acknowledge and advocate for more for our Darebin community and the community that extends beyond that. The pandemic is a catastrophe. It is a global economic battle. The government has introduced a moratorium on evictions, rent relief and a temporary mortgage suspension. It has not addressed business loans, credit cards, essential services and utilities. And what the community needs is a suspension on interest calculations. After this pandemic, a debtor will owe the original debt and interest, but also compound interest on the debt. That's a world of catch-up for many. It is economically a disaster and a debt delay. Not only during this epic pandemic, but for the last 3 years, I've been watching from people purchasing infant formula and sending it overseas. During this pandemic, there's been a compounding effect that inclusion of continence aids, nappies and PPE equipment are also added. Whilst the federal government has placed a banning on exporting of PPE, those other items have not been addressed. This will be an economic war, and we need to stop foreign ownership of business and other natural resources. You're not an Australian citizen, you can't own it. Did you know that foreign ownership of water entitlement registered reveals that investors from China and the United States have the largest stakes? Water and our resources, business are our targets. What we don't need is more foreign investors of our assets, and we need to take control. Ask Rupert Murdoch what he had to do to own any assets in the United States. Finally, this NOM is about achieving outcomes for the community. What I ask my fellow councillor is to do is to take off their political hats and not use this NOM for political grandstanding. This is not a time for political posturing. It is about outcomes for the community, not grandstanding for election ticks and a scorecard of who voted for what. I don't have a magic wand to instantly make these changes. If I could, I will wiggle my nose and roar abracadabra. But what I do know is that the community is socially and economically in pain, and we need to advocate and deliver truths and outcomes.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to thank Councillor Messina for bringing this motion to us, and I might speak specifically about what's now the third point, which is about the Gender Equity Victoria joint statement. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that are in the 10 Things Government Can Do Now statement. So, for example, number 3 is boost family violence prevention and response activities to cope with an increased demand for support in the community. So I've been hearing recently that there's actually some of the hotlines for family violence and domestic violence have gone quiet, and that's quite possibly because families are at home, everyone's at home, and people aren't safe to make a call. So we know that I heard someone say the other day that they think it's quite possibly a calm before the storm. So I absolutely support calls to boost family violence prevention and response activities. We've seen, probably since Councillor Messina wrote this motion, we've actually seen some quite good ways of supporting workers that have been stood down. So we've seen the JobKeeper payment, for example, come through. We've seen New Start finally doubled, and I hope that can be permanent rather than temporary. But what this Gender Equity Victoria statement talks about is providing recognition and support to carers and educators at home, to make sure that women essential workers have the PPE equipment they need, and that all essential workers should have childcare funded by the Commonwealth for the duration of the pandemic. So luckily, I think that's one that is well on the way. So again, thank Councillor Messina for bringing this to us, and support the strongest action possible.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Williams.
I have an amendment.
Yes. Do you want to?
Everybody should have a copy of that.
So is that the one that actually had been listed with the title urgent business at the top?
No, but it's also at the back too.
It's also at the back. Okay, thank you.
As noted as an amendment for the notion of 10.1.
Okay, so I'll just give every councillor time to make sure they have that amendment in front of them. And then I'll ask the mover and seconder. So at the top of the page, it's the second last sheet of paper. At the top of the page, it has amendment notice of motion 10.1 consultative mechanisms. The thing that councillors should see that will tell them they're on the right page is that on the bottom right of the page are the initials JW, indicating that this is the amendment being proposed by Councillor Julie Williams. So I will ask the mover and the seconder if they accept that amendment.
No.
Accept.
Yes, so Councillor Williams, there's been clarification sought. It was my understanding that these points would be in addition to the motion moved by Councillor Messina, but can you clarify whether they're in addition or instead of the points moved by Councillor Messina?
No, they're in addition, they're not instead.
Okay, thank you. So, councillors, please read those points as being in addition to the motion moved by Councillor Williams. So, in fact, where it says that one, Councillor Williams, those would be sequential, and instead of being item 1, it would be 4. It would be a point 4 with items A through to I as the amendment. Is that clear? Can I just get nods to make sure that everyone... Okay. So now that we're clear on the amendment, and, you know, I do acknowledge this is more difficult because we don't have that up on the overhead projector, I'll ask the mover and the seconder whether you accept the amendment.
No.
No.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. That amendment has not been accepted. I'll seek a seconder. It's been seconded by Councillor Greco, so we'll now debate the amendment. Councillor Williams, over to you to debate the amendment.
Okay, so the amendment is actually asking for an economic stimulus package from 10 to 15 million to obviously hold permits for chairs and tables and Food Act registrations and street trading permits, to ask for special rates for current financial, taking the burden off the business operator, to look at other formulas to subsidise rates, to put on our website great communication for our businesses to be able to access government funding, to work with relevant government representation who can negotiate subsidy for utilities such as your water, gas and electricity, officers to develop a strategy to open up communications with the landlords, real estate agents and business operators to negotiate help with rent relief, obviously to involve with banks to freeze or subsidise loans, insurance complies to do the same, and deliver a communication brochure for the businesses and one for the residents regarding self-help tips and websites and information that helps on where people can go, and obviously delivery services. And H is to survey the community and formulate a strategy to encourage locals to continue to support local businesses. And I is use discretion on car parking fines around activity shopping centres. We find ourselves in a challenging times, and council should be focusing on issues at local level by supporting the local community. That means business operators, residents that are unemployed, seniors, homeless, vulnerable carers, mothers and people with disabilities. Every aspect of this community needs to be taken care of, which makes up this community. A job gives a person purpose to wake up every day. It helps with one's mental, physical and financial stability. It's a no-brainer that this is councils must support the businesses of Darebin, and it's its priority and its number one pillar. The elevated rail works at Reservoir has had significant slowing of foot traffic and sales in the area. The centre has had a triple threat to the retail community. Now the coronavirus has seen many businesses close their door, and for one business owner, it came crumbling down and all too much to bear. Winter is approaching and the flu season is the quietest time for activity shop trading of the year. Finally, part of this stimulus package would also include a plan for stimulating the local economy after the fact, what and how this council prepare to do for when this is all over. What are the planned
10
actions
seconds.
to get the economy moving again, and how are we going to, the confidence for our community, and how are we going to
Thank you,
communicate
that's
that
time.
strategy? I agree with my fellow councillor. This is not about politics, it's about community outcomes.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
May I reserve my right to speak?
Thank you. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Amir.
There's not a day goes by that I don't worry about the businesses here in Darebin, and to be honest, I was almost crying on my way here seeing High Street looking nothing like the High Street that we know. And while there are some businesses that have been able to do well and transition, for example, restaurants doing takeaway, for many, I really worry about how many will be able to survive this pandemic. However, I will be voting against this amendment. And while I acknowledge that the new local laws have not come into effect, given that they will be soon adopted, and also in terms of the principles of decision making, to making a decision about a value of $10 to $15 million based on the information that we have here is too great a value, I believe. It doesn't meet, I believe, the community expectations of the level of rigour that would be expected of a council. And while, of course, we all know we did adopt the $10 million package on Friday. That was hundreds of hours of work by dozens or hundreds of people who were experts in their field who came up with that package. And there's certainly things here on this list which absolutely warrant further consideration, and perhaps that's something that we could consider one by one as time goes by, or wait to see what might be possible through the federal, support of the federal government, state government. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to support this in its current form with such a big financial commitment without the time for consideration that it deserves.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'm probably on a similar vein to Councillor Amir. When we give consideration to amendments to, I think, what is a very well-formed notice of motion by Councillor Messina, we need to be really careful about just taking a whole lot of what seem like really nice ideas and trying to put them in and say that it's going to add up to $5 million. We received this afternoon, and it's not about the merits of the proposals, but some of these are actually already covered in Council's own package. Some of these are already underway as a result of state and federal government decisions, and some are certainly grounds for which Council may wish to do further advocacy, but I wouldn't feel comfortable agreeing to a list of things here without any of the work that's been done, and that was done in relation to the significant $10 million package that Council passed at a special meeting. I would just note that this is an evolving space, and I would, to support Councillor Williams in taking an interest in how we can strengthen our advocacy, I'd say that let's keep some of these things in mind as part of that further piece of work. But now is not the time to just take a whole lot of what are maybe very well thought through ideas and put them forward and say it's going to cost $5 million when we actually have no idea what this will cost. So there will be further packages, I suspect, both in relation to recovery and resilience, that Council will have to consider in due course. Other councils are now following Darabin's lead. Yarra City Council just passed a very similar package of around $7.5 million from memory, picking up some of those same things. We will learn from other councils. So this is not the end of the conversation, but I can't support what seems like a really nice list of things, but some of which are already being done, and most of which have not been costed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Greco, you reserved your right. Would you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I thank Councillor Williams for putting forward this motion, because in the last week or so, since we moved that package of some sort of support for our ratepayers and community, have had lots of calls from people sort of saying that it perhaps doesn't go far enough in terms of what council can do, and also what is within council's powers to actually support the community and traders in regards to the coronavirus crisis. We've seen that the federal and state government have actually pulled out all stops, unprecedented in relation to what they are doing to try and support the community in relation to the coronavirus. And we've actually seen a very conservative, neoliberal government almost become a socialist government temporarily in order to support the community. And given that we are a tier of government, I think we need to do all that we can that's within our reach to support the community. Otherwise, we'll be remiss of ourselves of doing something like that. So the suggestions that have been put here by Councillor Williams, I think, go some way in some way in supporting the community, and particularly local traders with greater support. I think the community will see what the state government has done, will see what the federal government has done, but the rumblings that I am already hearing, particularly from traders, that the councils are not doing enough in relation to providing them support. I know that this puts strain.
10 seconds.
Yeah, I know that this will put strain on the budget, but as I've argued previously, our budget is not a fixed piece of work. We can borrow money. There are counting ways that we can
Thank you, that's time.
Get the money, like the federal and state government have actually dug deep to find the money.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now wish to speak to the amendment. Sorry, further speakers to the amendment? No, okay, so I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. We'll return to debate on the motion. We've heard from the mover, Councillor Messina, and the seconder, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers?
I have a further amendment, which I did put through, but Stephen, our governance person, has not printed it out.
Okay, we don't have that then. Are you able to very slowly read that, or shall I get Mr Mann to...
I've given it to Mr Mann to read out.
Okay, Mr Mann, I'll get you to read that out nice and slowly so councillors can hear it.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, this is a further amendment. In essence, it's the amendment that we've just dealt with, significantly reduced. So I'll read it out. The council subsidised table chairs, footpath trading, A-boards, cafe screens, Food Act registrations and street trading permits, etc. B, subsidised Preston and Reservoir special charge scheme / special rates. It'll be C, right to the state and federal government representatives to negotiate utility for businesses in the area. D would be council distribute a brochure for the businesses and residents that provides handy hips and tips, websites to visit for information, community information on rent relief, accessing government funding, lifeline details and delivery services. And E would be conduct a community survey and formulate a strategy to continue to support local businesses.
Mr Mann, can I seek advice on that, because that to me was almost substantially the same as the amendment that we've actually just debated. So I'm querying whether it's allowable.
Through you, Mayor, as I mentioned before I read it out, it's the amendment that was presented, substantially reduced. It's probably down to half of those items. So it's certainly changed from the amendment was lost. It's reduced. My view is it could be presented as a further amendment and debated.
I know the CEO is just looking at the governance law.
Mayor, just for clarity, I think it would be good if we can hear that amendment slowly and clearly again. So that we can consider it.
So I think actually what we can do is refer people to the amendment that you did have, and well, yes, send a copy at the same time for those who are working electronically, but we might also note that some of us aren't, and so we'll actually note off on this. Okay, councillors, we'll take a 5-minute adjournment until, well, actually, we'll make that an 8-minute adjournment. We will restart at 7:55, and that's on the phone clock. Don't look at that clock up there, which is wrong. So we'll take a brief adjournment. 7:55, we will be reseated, and we'll have copies of that in front of us.
I said the motion, I thought I'd said this afternoon, but it obviously hasn't been received. It was quite a lengthy motion, so if I rewrite it out, I could rewrite it out on the computer so that people can see.
People clearly have a preference for the computer. If you reckon you can type it out in this break, if you can type it on the...
I'll probably need more than 8 minutes to do that.
Is it an amendment or what is it?
It's an amendment to this motion.
All right. An amendment.
To the
Okay.
notice of motion.
Yeah, if you type it and email it.
Yep.
Okay, so start typing if you
I thought
can.
I'd sent it.
Yeah, if you could start typing, that'd be good. Thanks, Gaetano. Do you want to start typing?